Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to the Barn of Terror. Yes, I'm coming to you today from the Barn of Terror, which is appropriate because today I'm talking about the return of Horror Mayhem. That's right, Horror Mayhem 2024. The fantastic reading event, Horror Mayhem, comes lurching back onto the scene. This is, of course, the fantastic reading event created by the Bookish Bryants. Horror Mayhem, where we will be reading horror, mostly horror short fiction. The original idea for this was to read shorter horror fiction, novellas, short stories, stuff that is under, I think 200 pages was the limit, which I am going to be breaking, as I usually do for Horror Mayhem. I like to break all of the rules for the reading events I take part in, including this one. So Horror Mayhem this year, bunch of fantastic co-hosts joining along with us. I will link them all down below. Unfortunately, the Bookish Bryants cannot be with us this year because of pressing and serious health concerns. They have some stuff they have to take care of in the dreaded real world. So we will be carrying on for them, and Horror Mayhem this year will be done in the honor of the Bookish Bryants. And I have a TBR, more or less. You know, my TBRs, they never seem to last more than a couple books before I veer off course and just start reading, whatever's lying around. I'm not terribly successful with TBRs, but I do have some books that I have lined up for this event. So we're going to talk about that. Now, this event does have some weekly prompts. I will put them on the screen here. We've got week 1, local horror, which I'm assuming is horror set around where you're at. I think there's nothing horrible going on here at the Barn of Terror. Number 2, movie horror, which I assume is horror related to film. I don't know, maybe novelizations or stuff like that. I don't really know, to tell you the truth. Number 3, classic horror. And number 4, contemporary horror. So there you go. Those are the weekly prompts. I will entirely ignore all of them except for week 3. Yay, week 3. Every week for me is going to be week 3 in Horror Mayhem. It's mayhem. It's just mayhem, We also have this cool bingo card thing, which you can check off. I'm always terribly unsuccessful at any kind of bingo anything. And I'm old, but I'm not enough of a senior citizen to do bingo correctly. So there is a bingo card, which I will be paying attention to and checking things off, although I won't be able to really make much of a dent in the bingo card, I'm sure. But there is a bingo card, which is really awesome. But what the heck am I going to be reading during Horror Mayhem? Well, I've got a few things lined up, so let's talk about those things. First of all, for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, Roger did not join me today in the Barn of Terror because he's afraid of the Barn of Terror. Roger, what a cowardly mummy. And now Roger is actually back home in the manor, which is over 100 miles away. Holding down the fort. Who knows what I'll come back to. But for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club, we do have an entry which is suitable for Horror Mayhem, except for its length. It's a little long. So Roger's Cheap Old Book Club is the book club which I do every month, which is a cheap old book, a book you can get for free on Project Gutenberg. And this month's book is The Beetle. The Beetle by Richard Marsh, which is a horror novel which came out at the same time Dracula did, came out right around the same time. It has not endured quite the same way as Dracula has, but it does have a creepy monster in it. So The Beetle by Richard Marsh, I'm going to read this, and you can read along with me for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. Like I said, you can get this for free on Project Gutenberg, or there's a few print editions, like this one from Penguin. So The Beetle by Richard Marsh. That's how I'm going to be starting it out. And it is too long. And it has nothing to do with the first week's prompt, unless you live in England. If you're in London, I guess this is local horror. But Here it's not. Oh well. And it's too long. How long is it? It's 361 pages long in this edition, so it's too long, really. But I'm reading it anyway, so this is something I'm definitely going to be reading because it's part of Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. And the next book is definitely a lock. This is definitely something I am going to read for Horror Mayhem. And this is The Macabre Reader, which is an anthology edited by Donald A. Wollheim. Now, I've talked about this before. I did a whole video about this and its sequel. And I said at the time that I was going to read this for Horror Mayhem, and Horror Mayhem is coming up. So it's almost time for The Macabre Reader. And I'm really looking forward to this because this book has been lurking around forever in the dusty halls of Vaughn Manor. And it has a bunch of great stories in this by a bunch of great writers. I mean, we've got Robert Bloch's in here, H.P. Lovecraft, Donald Wandry, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert E. Howard is in here, Henry S. Whitehead. So there's some great authors in here. So I'll be reading this and I'll talk all about it after I've read it. This is full of short fiction, so this follows the rules of Horror Mayhem. It is another thing that will fit right in with week 3. Every week is week 3 for me, so there you go. Now this one, I'm probably going to read. This is The Transition of Titus Crow by Brian Lumley. I really like Brian Lumley, and he did pass away not too long ago. This is a book that's kind of a Lovecraftian type of book, and I've never read it. I've read his Necroscope books, his first few Necroscope books, and those are really good. I like Brian Lumley, and I've read another anthology by him, which is pretty darn good too. This is a novel, I believe, and again, too long really for Horror Mayhem. Let's see how long this book is. Let's see. It's 253 pages, so it's 53 pages too long, but I'm going to read it anyway. So, The Transition of Titus Crow by Brian Lumley. I'm probably going to read this during Horror Mayhem. You know, you never really know, but I definitely have this on deck. And this next one I really want to read. This is by Fritz Leiber, who is better known as a fantasy writer, but he also wrote a lot of horror. And look at that fantastic cover. This is shadows with eyes, 6 tales of crawling horror. 6 tales of crawling horror. Well, you can't get better than crawling horror, probably. So definitely, this is probably a lock for Horror Mayhem. This is a very Horror Mayhem book. Again, another book which has been just hanging out in the Dusty Manor for a long time. I've pulled it out a few times, so you might have seen it before. But I'm finally going to read it, I think, for Horror Mayhem. This looks awesome. Another week 3 pick. Now, this one is from the 80s. So does that make it contemporary or classic? Who knows? Actually, no, I'm wrong. I'm looking at this. It's actually copyright 1968, although this edition has to be from, this edition is from 1987. So this would qualify, I guess, 1968. This is Dagon by Fred Chappell. And I did see this book in Paperbacks from Hell, that famous book about 80s horror, which made all the 80s horror books very expensive when you try to get them. Used to be they were really cheap. Now they're very expensive thanks to that book. But this was in there, Dagon by Fred Chappell. It's got the awesome step back cover, which you need on all 80s books of horror. So again, this is a book I was going to read last year for, it wasn't for Horror Mayhem. I was going to read it for Garbogust because it looks kind of Garbogusty, but I didn't. It just wasn't trashy enough. So I will probably read it for Horror Mayhem. It's been hanging out, so I want to read that one. And this one is another one that I think I did want to read this one for Horror Mayhem last year, but I didn't. This is from Robert Bloch, and this is Flowers from the Moon and Other Lunacies. This is an Arkham House book. Arkham House, a publisher which published all kinds of great horror books and fantasy books and some science fiction. Arkham House, which was originally founded by August Derleth and Donald Wandry to publish the fiction of H.P. Lovecraft in hardcover. And they did that. And they also published Robert E. Howard and Clark Ashton Smith. And here is a book from Robert Bloch with this great werewolf cover where they're just chowing down on some bones, and you got more werewolves in the back. And this isn't a particularly old one. I think this was probably from what, the 90s? Let me see when this was published. Yeah, 1998. They no longer publish books, Arkham House. They are no longer publishing, unfortunately. But this has a bunch of stories in it, which are some very old stories, I think. These are old weird tales and strange stories. Stories that were published in Weird Tales and Strange Stories. So early Robert Bloch. Robert Bloch, probably best known for being the author of Psycho, but he wrote so many other books and so many other stories. And I haven't talked enough about Bloch on my channel. So yeah, this would be a good one to read for Horror Mayhem. Short fiction, it's awesome, it fits, and it's for week 3. Every week is week 3 for me. So there you go. Be sure to check down below in the description box for all of my fantastic co-hosts. Go check out their magnificent channels. There'll be a lot of announcement videos up today. A lot of them are probably already up. But there you go. My plans for Horror Mayhem. And I will catch you next time.